You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Dan Shafer is back. He is, of course, award-winning veteran Milwaukee journalist who publishes a weekly opinion column called the I'm say it wrong every time, Recombobulation Area. And I think that's now part of Civic Media, and Civic Media is a fabulous contributor to the independent media landscape. They're working to fill the gap in Wisconsin that corporate news seems incapable of filling. And Dan, I believe, aren't you the Civic Media's political editor now?
That's correct. Absolutely.
That is great. That is really first rate for Civic Media and really good for Wisconsin.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right, let's start here. It was October of 2016. The Access Hollywood tapes come out, and Americans hear Donald Trump bragging about grabbing women in the crotch. And for a moment, his campaign is in trouble. But without an alternative, the Republicans circle the wagons, Dan, and they save him. After he broke the law and blackmailed Ukraine, he was impeached. And again, Republicans circled the wagons and protected him. And it happened a third time after the insurrection on January 6th. But every time we learn something new and we get better at holding him accountable. Dan, we have got to hold him accountable for that horrific capitulation to that war criminal Putin we saw yesterday in the Oval Office.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. You know, it just seems like Trump is coming in to try to really remake the, kind of post World War II, stability that we've had in the world for a long time. And it just seems like, capitulating to Putin, the way he reacted with Zelensky, it's just some absolutely ridiculous behavior. But I guess, is it surprising? I'm not. I can't say I'm all that surprised by the tenor that this took, especially coming from J.D. Vance in particular. It's I remember there was that viral clip from a couple of years ago talking about J.D. Vance. I think it was after Russia invaded Ukraine, and he just talked about how he didn't care, and doesn't care that a dictator is invading one of their neighbors. And it just seems like that's the type of policy that they're going to be implementing now. It's frightening.
Right. It's terrible. But not being surprised is different than not being disgusted. I mean, you knew it was going to happen, but it's still disgusting. And I think Americans are going to be appalled by it. And you know how these guys work. Suddenly they're going to blame somebody else. They're going to change the subject. They're going to try and say, oh, it was just banter. We didn't mean it. We just want them to pay us a little bit. Whatever it is, they're going to try and play it down and rescue themselves, because I think universally Americans were disgusted yesterday.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So let's not let them off the canvas this time. I mean, one thing we Democrats, I speak for myself, Democrats, but people on the left are terrible at, is take the knife out and cut his throat when he's down. The other guys do it gleefully.
Absolutely, and I think it's just a reflection of how how discombobulated the Democrats seem right now, and it just seems like this seems like a moment where you could really have a pretty obvious message to people about something, and I just wonder if we're really breaking through the noise and hearing those messages at this moment. Hard to say.
I mean, the messages, thank goodness, are coming from the bottom up. Let's talk about that. You had some town halls in Wisconsin during the congressional recess, and some of them, some of the very Republican districts. I think you had one in Oshkosh with Representative Glenn Grothman. It didn't go exactly as planned.
No, that's right. There were a couple of them, that really, I think, caught some of those Republican representatives off guard. And I think one was with, like you said, Glenn Grothman in Oshkosh had one of these where, quite a few people showed up. There was another with Republican Congressman Scott Fitzgerald in Washington County, probably one of the reddest counties in the state of Wisconsin. It's kind of like right in between being, a suburban area and a rural area. So it's just kind of the sweet spot for Republicans in the area right now. And they, Fitzgerald was really caught off guard by, hundreds of people who had showed up at that forum. And I think that's really telling that I think Fitzgerald's is probably the most conservative district in the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, like I said, Washington County there is probably the most right-wing district there. And he's met with, some real stark opposition. And I think it's, in particular to what Elon Musk and the DOGE project are up to. And also,
right.
The efforts on Ukraine. We saw some signs, some backlash on, those on Ukraine and some of the, the positions that the Trump administration, J.D. Vance and all have been taking.
And that was before yesterday. Yeah.
And that was before yesterday. That was last weekend.
I think, Americans.
From what I understand, there have been some other Republican town halls that were going to be happening, and they have since been canceled. One in particular, Derek Van Orden, who is the representative from Western Wisconsin, probably the most closely competitive congressional district in Wisconsin. Van Orden was going to have one of his staffers meet with the public earlier this week, and we had a reporter from Civic Media who was there, and the staffer canceled the meeting after they found out hundreds of people were going to be showing up.
Yes.
So not only did they
people want to meet with their representatives.
Have a meeting at all, but it was a staffer that saw that 100 people had signed up for this meeting. They had projected about 2025, something like that. And just because there's such an overwhelming response, they canceled the meeting entirely instead of just kind of meeting with some of the people that they originally arranged with. So it does seem like there is some real grassroots energy around Wisconsin standing up and opposing what's happening in Washington.
And I think that's better than if it came from a Democrat, because the Democrats' brand has been beaten up and beaten up and beaten up. I mean, but they can't beat up American people. They can't do the same thing. You can spend $1 billion on going after, I don't know, a candidate running for Supreme Court in Wisconsin. But they can't spend all that money against the people of Wisconsin and expect to win. So right now, I love that this is coming from the bottom up, and they're running for the hills, the cowards.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important sign. I know there have been some certain groups that have been organizing. Indivisible is one of them that they have a presence in some of these more rural districts in Wisconsin. And I think it's really important to see people stand up and fight back and make their voices heard in this pretty frightening moment that we're in.
Yeah. And some senators have held sort of virtual town halls. And I understand that the dumbest senator in the nation, who happens to be your Ron Johnson, that worthless rock of a man, he was like saying, Mr. Musk is great. He's saving us all this money. How are the program changes that we've seen affecting people in Wisconsin?
Well, I think, they're in a number of ways. I think, some of the federal, cuts that are coming, or the pause, the freeze, all of these different things, it's been just so chaotic. So to whatever extent that we can really wrap our heads around it, it's there when there was a freezing the federal dollars kind of in the early couple of weeks there, that really disrupted a lot of things in Wisconsin. I think there were a number of, Head Start, childcare, preschool type facilities that had to pause. I know one in Waukesha County had to shut down entirely. And there were, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening with USAID, that's impacting a lot of farmers in Wisconsin too, because they were, producing food crops that were, being, distributed abroad as part of this program too. And I think a lot of like USDA, there's a pretty significant USDA presence in western Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, and we're starting to see reports of those cuts for being really disruptive as well. And I think, here in Milwaukee, there were some layoffs at the VA hospital. I know there's a couple people I know who are, veterans themselves or families with veterans. They are pretty worried about having their health care disrupted by what's going on with Elon Musk. And, there was that press event where, Trump was meeting with the cabinet and Elon Musk was there. He's talking about, accidentally ending a program that's, designed to combat
guarding
Ebola,
nuclear safety.
Abroad.
Oh, Ebola too, right?
Oops, sorry. And so I think those are the types of things we're seeing in Wisconsin, too, as the rubber meets the road here. It's just like the uncertainty, the chaos, the confusion, it's just really kind of undergirding everything right now. Like in Wisconsin, this is a budget year for us. And people don't really know how that's going to impact the state's 2-year budget. Wisconsin's budget is in a pretty good place right now. It's a $4 billion surplus. But at the same time, I was talking to some people after the governor's budget address about a week and a half ago in Madison, and they're just like, this sounds like a great proposal, but we don't know what's going to happen with a lot of the federal dollars that come through to the state budgets and how that process, like this all might not matter, is kind of the response that I heard from some of the folks that I was talking to at the Capitol in Madison a couple of weeks ago. So it's just the uncertainty is really, is causing all sorts of problems in every direction.
Yeah, here in Illinois, I mean, the uncertainty is exactly as you say, but at present, the government is holding almost $2 billion that was allocated for Illinois, and governor can't get it. And it's a huge problem. Huge problem. So you've talked a lot about who votes when, and when Trump's on the ballot in a presidential race, like lots of people show up to vote who wouldn't ordinarily vote. And I think they're going to be badly impacted by some of these changes. But I certainly don't think there's anything that he's doing that's going to motivate him to show up. I mean, that performance, I thought yesterday, I was so disgusted, just so disgusted by that treatment of Zelensky. It made me think of Ronald Reagan and tear down this wall, and just the legacy of even no matter what party you're in, standing up for human freedom, and this guy not doing it. I think. Do you think maybe he's just lost for the Republicans a Supreme Court seat in your state?
Well, I do wonder. Because we're viewing everything right now through the prism of Trump's return to office, of what's happening with Elon Musk, if that's going to, kind of be, if it's going to make this state Supreme Court race that is 1 month from today, Wisconsin goes back to the polls on April 1st for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. But because I think everything's being viewed through this prism of what's happening in Washington right now, I think, a lot of people are wondering if this is going to look like a referendum on that, and especially a referendum on what's happening with Elon Musk, because he's getting so directly involved in this race. He's put up millions of dollars already through super PACs and contributions to the candidate in Wisconsin. He's tweeted about the race a number of times, about the right-wing candidate, Brad Schimmel, who's running against the more liberal-aligned candidate, Susan Crawford. I think because Musk himself is getting so directly involved in this race, I do wonder if it's going to be, a referendum on Musk, because I think, and I've written about this, we can get into a little bit about the Supreme Court race, but if Susan Crawford wins this race, if the liberal candidate Susan Crawford wins this race, it will likely mean that there is a liberal majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court until at least 2028. Just based on kind of which members of the court, which justices are up for the end of their 10-year terms over the next couple of years. The next couple of years after this one, there are conservative justices that will be up in spring elections in 2026 and 2027. But this is the Republicans' real chance to flip the court. But if Crawford wins, I think it's going to be so important for state courts to be a check and balance on what's happening with Musk, with Trump, and what they're trying to do in Washington. I think this
Absolutely.
is, I see it as a real opportunity for Wisconsin voters to say, even like Trump won the state, and it was the narrowest victory of the 7 swing states. But this could be an opportunity to say, hey, many people in this state voted for Trump, but we still want him to, kind of work within the framework of the law, right? And I think that is a message that will resonate with many Wisconsin voters.
Yeah, I mean, and just because of the, frankly, because of the U.S. Supreme Court, state maps are now drawn in state Supreme Courts. And that's not just the legislative maps for the Wisconsin legislature. Those are the maps that people run on for Congress. So the control of Congress, as close as it is, may rest on this election. And with all the weird stuff that's happening with the way electors are chosen, maybe the presidency is going to be up for grabs again, and it will depend on state courts. So this is an enormously important election for the whole country. And I know you guys in Wisconsin, you got your own business. It's not any fun to have the rest of the nation always jumping down and saying we need to get involved in Wisconsin and pouring tons of money in and filling your airwaves with terrible ads. I mean, I don't see political ads here in Illinois. So when I travel, it's a shock.
We're seeing almost nothing but political ads at this point in Wisconsin. Now that we're past the primary, we're into the kind of the general election cycle in the spring. It's just everywhere, and it's not just that. There's a race for state superintendent. There's race. There's a constitutional amendment on the ballot that conservatives are trying to use to get certain Republican voters to the polls to try and have a constitutional amendment that enshrines voter ID into the state constitution. They're clearly doing this to try to play to the MAGA base, to try to get more voters out. And so, I think this is part of the discussions that a lot of people are having in Wisconsin. And like you mentioned, Trump was really effective at getting some of those, what we call low propensity voters, getting people out to the polls. But that didn't necessarily translate in the same ways in other races, like for, Tammy Baldwin, Democratic senator. She won in Wisconsin by a narrow margin as well, even as Trump carried the state. And so I think you look at the type of electorate, and as we're kind of seeing this realignment, Trump had the highest popular vote total in the state of Wisconsin's history when he won last fall. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are showing up in a presidential election are going to show up in a spring election. I think it was about 3.5 million people that voted last fall total in Wisconsin. The typical turnout, like a high range of a turnout for a Wisconsin Supreme Court race is about like 1.5 million or 2 million people. So it's a much different electorate, and I think that might play to the Democratic endorsed candidate's advantage in certain cases, because I think nowadays those more reliable voters, the people who show up in every election, spring elections, special elections, their school board races in their hometown, whatever it might be, that has tended to skew more liberal, more Democratic in recent years. So I think, we always see super, super high turnout in Dane County, in and around Madison, for every election. It doesn't matter if it's a presidential election or some sort of special election, spring election, whatever it is. So I think it's those types of voters who show up in every election. But I know that, with all the Musk money, with all of the rest of it, money from the U-lines, they always put a ton into Wisconsin. Like, that's going to have a pretty significant impact on reaching people. And clearly Schimmel is running to try to just be a MAGA Republican. He said favorable things about the January 6th insurrectionists, the people who stormed the Capitol. He talked about he said that those people were treated unfairly by the legal system. And he's clearly just running to say, like, hey, well, Donald Trump won Wisconsin last fall. Let's just do the Trumpiest possible campaign to try to get people back to the polls in April. I don't know if that's going to work for him, but it's definitely been what his strategy has been in the last few weeks.
I think Americans are fed up with it. And if you guys are really the country's first referendum on Elon Musk, I mean, I know that's how Ben Wickler and the Democratic Party in Wisconsin is pitching the race to the rest of the country to raise money. But if that's what it feels like in the state, then I'm feeling much better about our prospects. Elon Musk is as popular as a Chicago alderman. I mean, he's not, right?
It's interesting because I don't know if the liberal energy is there. The opposition is definitely there for Musk, for Trump, for people wanting to have their say. I just don't know if people are fired up because I think we're seeing these like terrible favorability ratings for Musk himself, but it's also like you're not seeing super high approval ratings for, like, let's say Democrats in Congress, right? And that's more of like a national level type of thing. I think there is some frustration, but I do worry if that's going to be, kind of part of it too, that people are not, as motivated by their leaders. And, if we've got a very busy stretch coming up here in Wisconsin. Both of the candidates, Brad Schimmel and Susan Crawford, are doing a number of public events in the coming weeks. There's a debate happening on March 12th. I imagine there's going to be a whole lot of attention to this race, just like it was 2 years ago when the court was on the line when Janet Protasewicz won to flip the court. She won with an 11-point victory, and that ended up being the most expensive state court race in American history. I think there was more than $55 million pumped into that race, and I think just about every political observer in Wisconsin is expecting that number to, this year's number to eclipse that one in the spending on the race. So there's a lot of, and I think, because of Musk in particular, the Republicans have had the edge in fundraising in this race thus far. That was not the case 2 years ago with Democrats who were, that was kind of, the way I've been kind of thinking about it is 2 years ago was the culmination of this years-long effort to win back the majority on the court, which liberals had not had in Wisconsin for, 15 years, if not more. And I think that was the culmination of that project. And now it's a little bit different because you're, kind of defending that majority instead of trying to make, vote for a change. And I think that, creates a different dynamic for one as well. But I think this also kicks off 6 consecutive years in Wisconsin that we will have a Wisconsin Supreme Court race on the spring election ballot. So it is kind of the beginning of a new, chapter here for what we're looking forward to in Wisconsin.
Well, these Supreme Court races are so important. I mean, in North Carolina, they're right. The loser in that race, the last one, and he lost. They've recounted, is going to the court to try and throw out 65,000 votes. And they're seriously considering it, the Republicans on the court. So this notion that voters get to decide is on the ballot everywhere. That's what gerrymandering was about. It
absolutely is, because in Wisconsin, too, you think back to what was happening with the Trump campaign's challenges to try to overturn the election in 2020. Like, Wisconsin Supreme Court came the closest of any state court in the country to siding with the Trump campaign in one of their challenges. It was a 4-3 vote, and at the time, it required the one kind of, swing justice who, almost always aligns with the conservatives. But in the case of, basic fundamental democracy, he sided with the 3 liberal justices. This was Justice Brian Hagedorn. And so if we were, if Brad Schimmel wins again, I have no doubt that he would be siding with the more extreme conservative justices. and not be, kind of a more swing vote like Hagedorn. And so, you would have to call into question whether your votes are going to count in 2024 and beyond. And let's not forget, too, these are 10-year terms. For these races, right? And it's not just, we're electing somebody who's going to be on the bench for, the immediate future in Wisconsin. If whoever wins this race is going to be on the bench until 2035, that's a really far-reaching implication for this. And I think, whether it's, coming gubernatorial elections in the midterms or presidential elections, like there's a lot of those that will happen over a 10-year term. So I think it's really important for those of us who really care deeply about democracy in the state of Wisconsin, in the country at large, to pay close attention to this race and hope that Susan Crawford prevails.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that gives me some hope is, I look at your stuff. The recombobulation area is growing. You have, reporters contributing. You're now a big part of civic media. I just think this is so important to the fight against mis and disinformation in the state. And I know you go on radio shows like this all the time up in Wisconsin and here. All of this is part of, trying to find ways to connect with people who, aren't paying for news and they got other things on their mind. They maybe drop in and out. But it's really important that we share this kind of conversation with our neighbors and our community members and our friends, and so that they know what's at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm of course a big believer in independent media. And I think in Wisconsin, we've seen so many of the kind of corporate chain media that has really shrunk the ability for them to, to cover news, to talk about things, to, have commentary and different opinions and having different voices. And that's what, to a certain extent. But we're trying to be an oasis in the news desert with recombobulation area, with what we're doing across the civic media network, and continuing to grow and all of that. So I think, the role of independent media has never been more important than right now.
I agree. And it's never been more vibrant than right now. Independent media is rising to this incredible challenge in ways that, weren't certain and weren't obvious a few years ago. It's really a beautiful thing, and it is a reason for confidence.
I sure hope so. And I think we all recognize that we've got a lot of work to do. So,
yes,
it's going to be a long 4 years for a lot of us, but we've got a lot of work to do. But, these things happen, just one step at a time. And I think Wisconsin, with this spring election, the first real kind of state level race happening in the Trump second term. Of course, it's going to happen in Wisconsin, right? Of course, this is the place that's going to draw that spotlight. Just as we're at the very center of the electoral college map, at the very center of the congressional map, Senate map, all of those different things. Of course, it always comes back to what's happening in Wisconsin, our extremely evenly divided state. We can now say that 5 of the last 7 presidential elections in the state were decided by less than 1%. Everything is always so close.